There's a part of the Christmas story which is easy to ignore because it's not as sentimental and upbeat and positive as the rest of the story. And I'm not here today to spoil our holiday spirit, but to try to take a big picture of what God has done and is doing and making the Christmas story real in a very, very special way. Without this part of the story, then the beautiful part of the Christmas story really doesn't have as much meaning. You know, the light means a lot more when it's dark. All right, this morning when I got up at 6 o'clock and the electricity went out, well, I put on a candle, and that candle helped me to eat my breakfast, okay? Because it meant a lot because it was dark. And this story, even though it's dark, there's a light in the midst of it there. And so we'll take a look at that. The story we find in Matthew chapter 2, verses 16 through 18. It says, Herod, when he saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, became furious, and he sent and killed all the male children in Bethlehem and in all that region who were 2 years old or young or under, according to the time that he had ascertained from the wise men. Then was fulfilled what was spoken by the prophet Jeremiah, who said, A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be comforted because they are no more. This is part of the Christmas story, and like I said, we don't really like this part of the Christmas story. In fact, it's always bothered me because it just seems very unfair that in the midst of this beautiful story, there were innocent children who lost their lives. There were families that were ruined and changed because of what had happened there. A little background into the story. Bethlehem is a small village, but it's located just 6 miles away from Jerusalem. So it's kind of like a suburb, but not quite. Bethlehem was located on a hill, and close to it, there was another hill with another village that was called Ramah, which we read in this passage here. And back during the Babylonian exile, when Jerusalem was attacked, the Babylonians took a lot of the people from Jerusalem, they took them out to this hill, Ramah, and executed them there. Mostly it was the poor, it was the weak, it was the elderly, it was the children, people that they didn't want left behind to be on their own, but they didn't want to take them with them into captivity either. And so there was a huge slaughter that took place on this hill, which is right next to Bethlehem. So that gives some perspective of something tragic that had happened in the history of this area. But about 1,000 years before this Babylonian slaughter, there was another weeping that took place in Bethlehem, or near Bethlehem. There was a woman named Rachel. Her husband was Jacob. They loved each other very much. And through a little trick that Rachel's father played on Jacob, on his wedding night, he ended up not with Rachel, but with her sister instead. And so Jacob jumped through all the hoops he could so that he could really marry the love of his life. So he had 2 wives, one that he loved and one that he didn't. Rachel was the one that he loved. But the only one that could give him children was the one that he didn't love. And Rachel was barren, not able to produce any children. And so there was great weeping and great grief in Rachel's life for not being able to do so. And there's a whole drama that goes around that back in Genesis. We're not going to get into that today. But eventually God heard her prayerful cries and opened up her womb. And she not only gave birth to one son, but to a second son. Their names are Joseph and Benjamin, for whom the tribe of Benjamin there in where Bethlehem is named, the youngest son. But during childbirth, Rachel died. And so she didn't get a chance to be able to raise the second son or to raise the first one for very long. And so there was a lot of grief around the story of Rachel and her life. And so the people who lived in Bethlehem and in that area, there was a lot of tragedy in their history. They knew it was a place of weeping because of Rachel's tears. They knew that it was a place where the slaughter had taken place long before. And again, at a new era in history, a tragic thing happened in this area. Herod was a very evil, very crazy, psychotic king. He even had some of his own children murdered because he was that messed up upstairs. And when he knew from the wise men that there was a future king that was born in the area, but yet they didn't come back and report about it, in his fury, He had all of the male children that were 2 years old and younger that lived in the Bethlehem region killed, to be able to make sure that he could exterminate any chance of a king coming to take his place. But before this had taken place, God appeared to Joseph and Mary and said, "Take your child out of here because it's dangerous." And actually, they left the whole country and went to Egypt. They were refugees. They were immigrants in another land for a period of time. But that was for their safety. But meanwhile, while they were safe, while Jesus was safe, there were other children and their families that were affected tragically because of the birth. And it probably wasn't a lot of children because it was a bunch of small villages. I mean, probably population-wise, this may have affected a dozen or two children. And even though that's not a big number, losing the life of any one child is a tragic thing. And all of us, either in our own lives or the lives of people that we love, know the experience of losing a child. And it's not an easy thing. And it's not something that we take lightly. And it does bring grief and weeping. And it's a tragic thing to have to go through that. Whether it's in the womb, whether it's an infant, whether it's a grown child. Nobody wants to go through that at all, of seeing their children lose their life. And back in this area of Ramah and Bethlehem, there was a great cry that went out over the tragedy of Herod's men coming in and searching the homes and destroying the children who were there. And you think, this isn't fair. Why should these families be affected so tragically? While Jesus is saved over here in Bethlehem, why didn't the angel come to all of these families and say, "It's not safe to be here. Take your families and all of you leave"? You know, why did God allow such a terrible tragedy? And whenever tragedies happen in our life and in our world, we ask those questions. Why? Why the injustice? Why these things? As we think about the story that took place here in Bethlehem with the tragedy of losing these children, it stops us in our tracks and we think, what if it was me? What if it was my family? What if it was my children? What if it was my neighbor's children? What if it was my grandchildren? And our hearts are just pricked by the love that comes out of being able to empathize, sympathize with the people that lived even during that time. And so love is brought up inside of us. The Christmas story doesn't end in a packaged happily ever after. It ends with the slaughter of some innocent children and the injustice that went on. Most of us have never experienced an army or soldiers coming in and taking away or killing our children. We definitely know that we live in a world full of bad news. We know that Jesus wasn't born into a world that was spick and span and clean and just ready for Jesus to come to do what? Clean up something that's already been cleaned up? No. He came into a world that was dirty, that was rough, that was unfair, that was full of tragedy. He came into that world to be able to show that we're a world that needs a Savior. And the world that he entered 2,000 years ago needed a Savior because there were wicked kings that were out there willing to take the lives of innocent children over his own psychotic whims. That was the type of world that Jesus entered into. And Jesus entered in the world to say, I'm bringing peace, I'm bringing hope, I'm bringing joy, and I'm bringing love into this world where it's hard to find because of all this terrible stuff that comes on. And he says Jesus is coming to be able to be born, live a life, die in order to stand in the place of all of us and all of the world who are dead in our own sins. None of us have been as evil or will ever be as evil as Herod was. But even our little sins, God said, our little sins keep us away from God. Our little sins keep us away from other people. Our little sins cause us to be destroyed in our spirit and in our body and in our mind and in our soul. And Jesus came to say, I want to bring life to all of those places. And I will be your life. I will be not just the God that created you and allowed you to be conceived and to be born, but I will be the God that will come into your life and bring restoration to body and mind and spirit and soul. And that's what he came to earth to be able to do. And he becomes that for us as we invite him in to the empty place into our lives, into the ruin and the tragedy of our own world. These innocent little children were martyrs for a cause. But yet, Jesus came to give up his life for them as well, and for all of us, and for everyone in the whole world. To be able to come and say, I want to be your life, and I want to be able to give that life to you abundantly. And so there's nothing sentimental about this, but that's why Christmas is so important. That's why Jesus came. We think of the sweet baby in the manger and we get all sentimental about it, but the reality is that he came into a tragic, evil, terrible world in order to bring life and to bring light to the people who need it. And someday salvation will be complete. There will come a time when what he started will be fulfilled. And when he comes the second time, he said, I'm going to bring you into myself, and I'm going to set up a kingdom where there will be no evil Herods, nobody around that will cause pain and sorrow and suffering and tragedy. And he does that with a promise that we wait for in the meantime. But even in the midst of all of this, we can know that we are loved, that the love of God has come to the earth, and that it is here with us for now and every day of our lives.